It used to be that I was only ever sick for 24 hours, maybe 48. 2 nights of sleep were always enough to beat colds, flus, and other little bugs. When people say they have one or the other, I always wonder how they know. Is there a list of symptoms that they teach in public schools? When I was young, I rarely stayed sick long enough to develop a sense of the symptoms. It didn't matter what I had. I would be going to work the next day. I would be doing my best. This is Library Pizza, a podcast about reading. I'm Mike Meginnis. These days when I'm sick, it tends to linger. I declared myself healthy again on Thursday of last week. It's Thursday again. I'm still coughing. Now that I have plenty of time to get acquainted with my symptoms, it seems like they're always actually the same. I get sleepy, stupid, cruddy, congested. My habitual nervous cough becomes something more. It's like there is really only ever one sickness in me. My own personal minor malady, a poorly tendency that emerges whenever I become weak. If nothing else gets me first, if I can make it long enough, this will be the thing that kills me. All in all, a pleasant way to go. My guest this week is Tobias Carroll, a novelist, critic, newsletter author, podcaster, blogger, and columnist at Words Without Borders, where he writes The Watch List, a monthly list of books in translation that you might love. If I could read just those 5 or 6 books every month, I have to imagine that I would be happy. So much so that I wouldn't even mind the creeping advance of my personal malady. Tobias may read more than just about anyone else that I know, so I asked him to come by the show and tell me all about his life and history as a reader. We didn't quite manage to cover everything, so I'll have to have him back soon. You can learn more about his work at tobiascarroll.com. Carroll has 2 R's and 2 L's. I'll see you on the other side of my very dignified theme music, which was made by my partner, Tracy Ray Bowling.
Library Pizza! P-I-Z-Z-A! Library Pizza! P-I-Z-Z-A!
It's all happening. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm on the board of the National Book Critics Circle, and last week was the awards week, so it was a very busy week, and I think I'm having a little bit of like a psychological come down from that. I'm also just perennially depressed about the state of the world, as there are, dozens of things to be upset about pretty much every day. So, I got out of bed this morning, but it was maybe a little bit later than I would have liked to have gotten out.
That is one of the benefits of working at a hospital. I simply cannot not get up. I mean, I'm not doing anything that touches anybody's health and safety, thank goodness. But the culture is that, the nurses and the doctors have to show up. So generally the rest of us do too. But no, I mean, it was really hard watching the birthright citizenship discussion go on today. I don't know if you were paying attention while that was happening, but I mean, it looks like it's going to go the right direction, but it's so infuriating that was even a question.
Yeah. It's something that, I'm in my late 40s now, and it's like, that was always something where it's like, if you are born in the country, like you are a citizen, that's, a thing. Like, that's just, it's very, very unsettling to see kind of where the current administration is kind of, seeing what it can get away with and getting away with a lot more than, I feel super comfortable with. I mean, also just like, I guess, I was always raised to, and there were things that I was raised to do that I have broken with, but I was raised kind of to think about patriotism and nationalism differently, and I think I, kind of has always thought of patriotism as a more complicated feeling than nationalism, but also like the things that I find good about the country. Like, I don't subscribe to the sort of exceptionalism of like, America is the best country ever and everything we do is great. I also don't subscribe to the like, America is the worst country ever and everything we do is terrible. But like, the things that I like about the US are things that I think it's fair to say the people currently in power are pretty much the opposite of what they, think is good about it. And not only that, but are kind of working overtime to kind of get the things that I have always liked about the country, try to do as much damage to them as they possibly can. And that's, I mean, infuriating, upsetting, depressing, all of the above.
Yeah, it's what you say about patriotism versus nationalism that speaks to me, and I feel like it's partly like a matter of scale and like the unit through which you conceptualize the country. And what I mean by that is that like most of the stuff that I really love about the country, and there's a lot that I do, is stuff that I experience like locally or in like conversation with other human beings. And then like the country as a whole is kind of where we imagine patriotism sitting, but it's such a large collection of people that like you almost can't have good qualities at that scale. Like it's like a company that's just way too big for what it's supposed to be doing, right? Like you really can't organize life in the unit of millions and be consistently humane. So I feel like the people that feel that sense of patriotism that is more married to the sense of nationalism are folks who find the scale exciting and satisfying, right? They're like, I love having the tanks. I love having the ability to like really command and control other economies through our own, economic might or whatever. And those things all suck. And it's unfortunate that like it is hard to love your state or love your city in a way that feels like you can appeal to that value when you're talking to other people and like trying to get them to get on board with what's important to you, unless they happen to live where you do. That's not going to work. But then as soon as you go to the national political level, the things that you love are so slippery and they tend toward that nationalism. It's rough. I don't know. I guess I'm just agreeing with you. I'm just saying like I feel that too, because like I like a lot of things about the country, but it is so hard to remember them sometimes, and there is an effort right now to genuinely destroy them.
Yeah. I mean, it's also I'm not going to say it's funny, but like, I grew up in central Jersey, and it's a weird thing because like Jersey is overall a very diverse state. Which is one of the things I'm really glad that I grew up there, because I grew up, I'm a white dude, and I was raised Episcopalian, but it's like I did not grow up entirely surrounded by other like white Christians. I was kind of aware that it's like there are different ways to be, and there are different kinds of people, and everyone's just kind of there, and everyone's people, and it's great. So I'm grateful for that, but also like where I grew up is also still a pretty conservative, they're representative of like the town where my parents live now. And I think that's also the town where I grew up is a Republican who's been in power for, who's been reelected pretty regularly. And like there are, especially when I go visit family out there, there's a lot of Trump and Vance flags still, things like that. I think the town where my parents live now, I think there has not been a Democrat who has run for local office in like 20 years.
Oh, geez.
Every once in a while, I'm like, should I just like move back in like somewhere in that town and just run as a Democrat just so that there's someone? And then I'm like, or I might just have an entire town of people hate me, which would kind of be hilarious too.
I grew up in Indiana, and I mean specifically in Indianapolis, which is, of course, it's a different thing from the state as a whole. But even Indianapolis, if you are, as I also am, a white dude hanging out mostly with other white people, the culture there is about as conservative by default as the state as a whole. Yeah. And I feel like the main thing that like sort of protected me from buying in on a lot of the stuff that the folks I knew like still believe today. I mean, there were a couple things that like really suggested that I should have turned out to be a real piece of shit. One is I was homeschooled. Another is that I was homeschooled not for religious reasons, but by people who were unhealthily religious when they started with me, right? When I was a kid, I had to dress up as only biblical characters for Halloween.
Oh, wow.
And stuff like that. But the thing that I think like sort of
there are all those studies. I don't know how real these are. I feel like the reality of this kind of thing changes from day to day, but there are the studies that show that like the number one like personality axis that determines whether you're going to be liberal or conservative is, are you open to novel experiences or are you afraid of them?
Yeah.
And like I love novelty in art, so I think that protected my baby brain. And then there's also the fact that my mother was a Spanish teacher. Mm-hmm. And so there was just this natural sense that there were other people in the world who spoke a language that was like a valid language to speak, that they had culture, and that we were happy to see them in the state when we got to speak to people who knew Spanish, because then we could practice our Spanish.
Yeah.
So there was a natural like sense of happiness in encountering other people from other places. And that's something that, Indiana does not historically necessarily encourage.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Like I have a good chunk of family in Austria, and it was a similar thing where it was kind of the like, there was always growing up, there was I was over there for the first time at the age of 7, and it was, there was always a sense of like, well, there are other countries, and like even as a 7-year-old, I could be like, well, this is not, people don't look, there doesn't seem to be abject misery here. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, there are people here and they speak a different language, but like this looks pretty nice to me too. Yeah. Like this isn't, there are other ways of kind of getting at happiness and contentment.
I was wondering if you remember the one time we physically met. It was so brief. I would almost be surprised if you did. You may not have even known it was happening.
Was it a Brooklyn Book Festival?
Yes.
Was it when the Brooklyn Book Festival novel was out?
Yep. Yeah. I think it was 2015. It's a 2014 book, but I want to say that it was 2015 when the book festival that I attended was there, and I was on a panel. I was really happy because I was the token white guy on the panel, which is a wonderful experience if you can have it. That was like back in the time when I feel like people were starting to occasionally do the thing of looking at the panel's makeup and saying like, I cannot be your 8th white guy. I'm not going. You gotta pick somebody else. And so I was like, I guess I'll throw myself on that grenade if I have to. I suppose I'll try to be brave. And then I didn't have to. And that's great. It's wonderful when you conveniently don't have to stand for your principles.
I feel like as someone who's gone to Brooklyn Book Festivals for many years, I feel like they are very, very good about, I think both in terms of who is on a given panel, but also just like, I say this as someone who I've moderated a few panels, and I was a panelist once, and I think in every case they've done a very good job of both a good array, a good assortment of people, both demographically and sort of aesthetically, but also still finding a good sort of connection where like it's not 3 or 4 people each talking about completely different things.
There was actually this really weird coincidence, and I wish I remember who the other writer was that I had this with, but it turned out that we both had written unpublished novels about like young men, in my case, a teenage boy who shrank down until they disappeared and had sex. Those were the sort of 2 key things that we had in common. I was like, I was shocked that we had that in common. Delighted, of course.
What are the I feel like the odds for that when you were like young men, I was like, well, there's a lot of people who have written novels about young men, but it's like shrinking young men and there's sex.
Yep. So yeah, no, it was really nice. And the little encounter that we had that I remember with some embarrassment, whenever, we have little interactions online or whatever, is I was at the booth for the publisher, which at the time it was Black Balloon that right? acquired the book, but then I think it was Catapult that published the book. I don't remember if they quite changed their name yet, or if they were. Yeah. It was still under Black Balloon as far as like that was the imprint that it was published under. But so it's the like initial inaugural Catapult Brooklyn Book Fest. And I'm talking to some people. I'm enjoying the thing that genuinely happens, I feel like 5 times in a minor author's life, which is you have a day where you kind of feel like a writer, where like you feel like the people around you know that you're a writer and they're kind of relating to you as one and respect you as one. So I'm on cloud 9, and somebody comes up and like buys a book or something, and someone says to me, "Oh, it's Tobias Carroll." And I don't quite register I'm like, oh, okay. And you said hi, I think. And then like as you walked away, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I know who that is. Damn it. Like, it was it because I'm so bad with names. I'm so bad with faces. There was the first time we'd actually seen each other in person, and I just was like, I was so far behind.
I have a similar, like, I'm pretty good with faces, but I'm not great with names. And so, like, were you also just at AWP?
I was not this year. It's funny you say that though, because my joke for years has been that whether or not I'm there, it feels like I am because basically, 50% of the people there look exactly like me. But I'm told that's less true now.
Yeah, I would say so too. I would say so too. I no longer quite feel like, like I could be the stunt double for a good chunk of the thing, which is a very good thing, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there are times where like I will run into people and it's just like, oh shit, I know who you are, but I've said this before. I don't think I will ever. I'm creeped out by the idea that like internet connected glasses are now becoming a thing. But I will say the one thing that I would find it useful for would be like at parties, if I could just go through and it's like the little like, here's everybody's name. And it's like, right, you met, and just like, oh yeah, you're Bob. Hello, Bob. But
yeah,
it's problem as old as time. And I don't particularly want to, be the human panopticon. Does not seem like a completely a solid trade-off for that. So yeah.
No, but you have created, I do find those extremely creepy. And you've now reminded me that there are like one or two things where I'm like, okay, but that would rule.
Yeah.
I would love if I could guiltlessly just have something that could remind me of people's names, because it is the most. I saw a student the other day at the hospital where I work. She happened to walk by in the hallway at the same moment I was walking through, and we were headed to opposite places. We had about like 15 seconds where we could speak to each other. And initially I had no idea who she was, did not recognize her in the slightest. She said her name, and it was a very specific name. So that was like almost enough. But then she reminded me the context where I met her. And I was like, oh, great. You're an adult. That's incredible. It's been like, 6 years since I saw you, but because you were an undergrad, you're now like having your professional life and you exist in the world. And that's amazing. And that was the entire interaction. And then she had to go into a doorway, and I will probably never see her again, even though we work in the same building, maybe in the same hallway, judging from the door that she went into. And I wish I'd gotten her a little bit faster. It feels rude. I mean, it's especially bad with students. With students, it's so hopeless because they change so much between the times you see them. I think it's fair to say that you have an unusually like broad, deep, and interesting reading life by comparison to most people for a number of reasons. You've got the participation in the National Book Critics Circle. You've got all the work that led to that. You've got your writing, all this other stuff. And so I wanted to ask you if you would kind of take me through and like be as self-indulgent as you feel like in this. Do not be
boy, that's dangerous. That's dangerous.
Well, I can always edit if I need to, but like I'm thinking like from when you were a kid, whenever you started getting interested in reading to now, like how do you see the overall shape of it? Like how did you get interested? How did that interest develop, and how did it end up becoming what it has been in your life?
So I think one of the places I should start is like both of my parents read. They have a lot of books. There's always a book that they're reading. So I think part of it is just I grew up thinking like this is like a part of life. This is probably almost as much of a part of life as like sleeping and eating and when you're an adult, doing some kind of work. That like this is just something you do. So, I think I was also a pretty avid reader, and I think I started reading kind of a little above my grade level. So I mean, when we're talking about me as a very small child, I mean, some beyond children's books, like I think I was reading a lot of like Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys books, and then somewhere along the way I think started reading a lot of like fantasy and science fiction. My oldest friend and I are both pretty fast readers, and sometimes people will still give me or my friend shit about this, that like we were often somewhat like in middle school, we were kind of competitive readers. Like, oh, I just finished this book today. Like, well, I finished this book and that book today. It's like, God damn it. By the time I'm in, say, 8th grade, I'm not really reading any sort of literary fiction at the time, but, you know, I'm reading a fair amount of Stephen King, and I was getting into, you know, I had read The Lord of the Rings by that point. In 8th grade, I started reading the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series, which I finally checked out of about 8 books into it, and have not made it to the end, I think in part just because I was like, this is just way too long. And little did I know that the author would die before he finished writing the series. So, and this is maybe this is my confession is that I also read just a genuinely absurd amount of officially licensed Star Trek novels.
Yes.
So, which also my oldest friend was also reading. He's also, I think, the person who got me into Star Trek. And so yeah, I read a lot of those. And although to some extent there were some writers in there that like also Peter David, who died recently, did most of his writing in the comic book space, like did like a fantastic run on the Incredible Hulk in like the 80s and 90s, but also wrote a few like comic fantasy novels, and also wrote a couple of Star Trek books. And John M. Ford, who, I don't know if you're a John M. Ford reader at all.
I don't. It feels like I must have read him at some point, but a book is not coming to mind.
So there is a fantastic article. I think it was Isaac Butler wrote it for Slate a few years ago. The John M. Ford, like the one book that he wrote in the Star Trek universe, is a very kind of weird. I think it was sort of described as like a Gilbert and Sullivan like operetta, but like it's also got like Kirk and Spock and Klingons in it. But that was not like the bulk of his work, and he wrote these like sprawling, ambitious, sometimes fantasy, sometimes science fiction novels. The Dragon Waiting is probably his best known book, and it's sort of set in a alternate medieval Europe where Christianity never quite took hold. So like you have, you know, the Catholic Church is a faction, but there are also just like various sort of pagan religions have persisted to, you know, I think it's like the 12th century AD.
Yeah.
So
I'm remembering, I think I did read that one. I'm looking at the cover. I didn't finish it. I started it and then I drifted away. I didn't come back, and I keep every now and then I see that one, and I think maybe I should go back to it. You think I should?
I mean, his whole discography is great. So like the Butler piece, because part of it is like, he talks about how John M. Ford was also very much like a writer's writer. Like actually Robert Jordan was like a huge, like they were friends. Jordan was a big champion of his. Another champion of his who has not aged nearly well is Neil Gaiman was a big champion, you know, advocate for his work. And it was kind of like Butler was looking into like why, you know, I think Ford had died a few years earlier, but he was kind of like, why has this guy, whose champions include I believe J.R.R. Martin is a big, like, oh my God, he's so good. You know, why is this guy who, like, some of the biggest names in the genre lavished praise upon, like, why is this guy completely... What Butler found is that there was actually a very interesting legal reason for that, which was like the question of who had the rights to his estate was this like incredibly complicated legal one. And so part of the joy that comes from this article is that in researching and writing this article, Isaac Butler was basically able to like get all of the people who had to talk about getting these books back in print to talk. And in the last like 5 or 6 years, Tor has reissued most of them with like new introductions by just a incredibly wide variety of articles. Like Francis Spufford contributed, I think, 1 or 2. And it's great to have these books back in print. There's one, I think the most recent reissue was, I think, the book called The Last Hot Time, which is just this sort of kind of supernatural noir book. But even like the book that he was working on at the time that he died was just published in an incomplete form. And it's so fucking good. Oh my God. Like, it is incredibly sad that this book was never finished, because apparently it was supposed to be like, what you have is essentially the first half of a novel that was supposed to be the first book in a 5-book cycle. But even just in like the descriptions and the characters, like even that is just like this incredibly like satisfying bit of fiction, even though it's like, this is never going to, like, I am never going to know some of the stuff that gets up, but it's like, but you're just immersed in this world, and it's so good.
Well, there's a pleasant inversion there that I haven't really thought about in these terms before, but you know, I get frustrated with with the fandoms that are associated with long running series. Like I haven't read J.R.R. Martin's books, but obviously he's the example that comes to mind. But there's plenty of others where they get really anxious, and they get increasingly anxious as the author nears death, because they're saying like, well, what if he doesn't finish the book? There's going to be this incredible payoff. And it's like, my experience as a reader has not been that when I reach the end of a thing, it transforms completely, and either it was worth my time or it wasn't, right? Like a book should be interesting and useful or exciting or beautiful or whatever it's going to be all the way through. And, you know, if you've enjoyed your time with J.R.R. Martin's books and you're not going to see the end, well, who cares? You enjoyed your time with them. And if you didn't enjoy them, stop reading them and like relax. So there is a kind of, I feel like there is something nice with reading the unfinished book where you go in knowing this is not going to solve my problems. It's not a complete vision. It is an artifact created by a person at a time, to the extent that that person was able to create that artifact, and it stops when it stops, and it is what it is, which is true of everything, right? But you don't usually feel that sense of resolution in advance. Usually the average reader is thinking like, I really need this to come together.
You know, I wonder, I've had Stephen King on the brain because I have a freelance piece in the works. There's a book coming out called, I think, My Year of Fear, where it's about someone who has like spent a year going through his archives and talking to him about his early books. But I'm wondering, because I remember when Stephen King had the car accident that almost killed him, you know, he sort of afterwards was like, I need to finish the Dark Tower books. Like, this was a wake up call. And like, to be fair, I think that is also a completely admirable, where he was just like, I'm putting everything else on hold. I want to get this done. And like, again, that's great. Like if that's what he wants to do with his time. And one of these days I need to sit down and just read through, because like those books, I remember reading the first couple in like middle school and high school and being like, this is great. And then it just kind of stopped. And then I was like, probably in my most literary snob era when he started them back up. And so I've read other recent Stephen King books since then, but I haven't sat down. I think in part because I need to just sit down and just be like, I'm going to read 8 fairly weighty novels back to back. But I'm glad that he was just like, I need to do this. But I think it's also like, not everyone is going to do that. And if somebody else has another thing that they're like, this is the thing I have to do first, and if the other thing doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. Yeah. Like I agree. I mean, there are some books, I think, or some series I have read, some for pleasure, some for assignment, some for both, where there is definitely the sort of, for lack of a better word, like to borrow a term from, I believe, J.J. Abrams, like the mystery box plot, where it's like, if this does not all come together, I kind of think that's like, I've read the first 2 books in the Patrick Rothfuss trilogy, and I think part of that is like, he has set himself up such an ambitious structure and like all of these different things where like, I could kind of see why he's run into a problem where it's just like, he's just like past Patrick Rothfuss wrote this incredibly ambitious thing for future Patrick, and now present Patrick Rothfuss has to actually figure out all of these incredibly complicated things. Whereas like J.R.R. Martin, I think finding, as the TV show showed, like finding a satisfying conclusion to that series is not going to be easy, but like it's still a pretty linear story as opposed to, the whole Rothfuss like frame narrative and everything else that's going on there.
I mean, to undermine my own argument a little bit, it did occur to me that I can think of a book where, I mean, obviously this is, it shouldn't be surprising that this is the case, because there's a lot of books that have this reputation, but the one that came to mind for me was, for whatever reason, Poor Things, which have you read it? Yeah. So like my experience of Poor Things, which I guess I don't need to summarize probably for the listener, because the movie has refreshed people. My experience of the book was that up to a point, I found it pornographic in a way that I did not particularly love. I felt that it was going a little too easy on the male characters, and it was rewarding some of their bad behavior in a way that was upsetting. And like that it specifically, it had the childish, actual leading woman character behaving in a way that did not make sense to me, but that was justified by the desires of the imagined reader, the writer, etc. And then you get to the end of that book, and it pulls back the curtain and says, this, you're right. What you have been reading up to this point was not plausible. You're correct to make that judgment. Even on its own terms, it didn't make sense. And here's what was actually happening. And that was really important to the success of that book for me. And my big complaint about the movie is it doesn't really pull that trick off. There's reasons it wouldn't know how. That would be a very hard thing to do in a movie, but it also is not, I think, particularly interested in the genuinely challenging parts of that book.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. There's, I've read the book and seen the movie, and a year or so ago, I might be blanking on I want to say The Friend. It's the film adaptation of, I think, a Sigrid Nunez novel that won a lot of awards. Film had Naomi Watts and Bill Murray. And I enjoyed the film quite a lot. I think probably the best role Naomi Watts has had in a very long time. So it's nice to see her get to do good acting. There's a scene briefly set at Greenlight Books in Brooklyn, which warmed my heart. But from what I was reading about the novel, it sounds like I think the novel is a lot more like narratively complex, whereas the film it's I think emotionally complex because it's sort of about this character trying to figure out how she feels about her friend and mentor who has kind of fallen into a despair because he's been canceled and eventually dies by suicide. But from what I understand, I was reading a review of one of the novels or some discussion of the novel where they're like, well, and this whole thing turns out to be X and Y and Z. And I'm like, oh, there's like this whole, it sounds like there's a whole like metafictional layer to the novel that was not present really in the film, which, I've been curious to check out the novel anyway, because I like what I've read of the author, but I have not, but I'm really curious about like whether there was just a decision of like, we can't do this. We have to, oh man. And now this is reminding me that I have neither watched nor read The French Lieutenant's Woman, the John Fowles novel, which, and I think that's like one of the few cases where I think a film adaptation did try to kind of reckon some of the narrative ambiguity, which I think, if I remember correctly, what I've read about the novel is that there are like alternate versions of different scenes. And so in adapting it, I think there was like, we're going to make this like a film about the making of a film so we can kind of turn like some of the parallel strands into like, well, this is the actors who are playing these characters will have one thing that echoes this one thing, and then the other thing we can do in this, which seemed like a very kind of like I'm a giant movie. I went to school and studied film, and so I think a lot about narrative storytelling in terms of both film and fiction. And it's always really interesting to me when I think about like, the idea of like, is the most faithful way to adapt a novel sometimes like not a very like strictly faithful way to adapt a novel. And like, at least based on that, and I have not actually seen the film, so I should probably do that. But like, that seems kind of like a way to be like figuring out a way to like get to the essence of the book in a very different way than, just a straightforward, like, we're going to just adapt, just going to copy everything down from the page to the page.
Yeah. I was on a real Bertrand Tavernier kick when they had that collection on Criterion. I'm only recently a movie enjoyer. For most of my life, I have found it torturous to sit through them, no matter how good they were. But it did help when I started. I learned that really I just kind of hate American movies, and most international movies get along with me much better. And he would tend to be adapting a novel. I feel like there was an era where that was much more sort of the default assumption, was that you would start with a novel and then you get a screenplay, and then, it might not have much to do with anything that was in the book, but you'd have that as a first draft. And I feel like he is the main example I can think of a person where the movies were more interesting and richer than the books, at least some of the time. I haven't read all the books, but there was, I'm blanking on the name. It was the one about the guy going blind. Cameras in his eyes.
I'm just looking at Tavernier's filmography, and I think the only thing I've seen of his is Coup de Torchon, which is absolutely a case of like a not terribly faithful film adaptation that is also like one of my favorite adaptations.
The one I was thinking of is Death Watch,
okay,
which is based on, let's see, I'm going to look at Wikipedia briefly to remind myself the book. It's called The Unsleeping Eye is the original novel by David Compton. The novel's fine. It's pretty good. And actually the movie is a little bit of a mess too, but it's a more interesting mess. I think the number one example though of an adaptation that for me kind of blew the book out of the water was, and this was, I usually try to read a book before I see a movie if I know that I'm going to be asking myself this question. But this time it happened the other way around. It was I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. The movie,
I'd seen the film first and I read the book after that, I think.
My experience of it was that the movie was like really interestingly ambiguous, and I got to the end of it and it was like confrontationally ambiguous. But by the end, I had a really interesting theory of how I thought things were working, and it trusted me to just kind of have that theory. And then I read the book, and the book is pretty good too, up until the point where it slams you in the head with confirmation that, yes, your theory is correct. Like the way that book ends is so graceless. It really feels like editorial interference of a kind. I usually try not to speculate about that kind of thing because the book is the book. But man, does that book end in a way that feels like it's climbing down from what was interesting about everything that came before that.
I have this is just because you brought that up. I've been watching the Netflix series Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen, which it's funny because I think one of the supporting, I was trying to figure out like where I had seen pretty much everyone in the cast who's not Jennifer Jason Leigh and Ted Levine. And like one of the people I was like, oh, they were also in I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is funny because like, I don't know if you've watched any of Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen.
I haven't.
The opening is kind of this couple going where a heterosexual couple, the young woman has never met her husband, and they're engaged, and she is about to meet her husband to be's family for the first time. So they're driving through this like endless wintry landscape, which is very much like kind of shades of at least of Kaufman's adaptation of I'm Thinking of Ending Things. And there's a lot of like weird memory stuff happening, which I'm like, I wouldn't be shocked if like there was some, borrowing of kind of, tone, because I mean, it does the tone really well. But I just thought it was funny that like the two of them not just like had some aesthetic similarities. And then I will say very quickly, at least based on where I am halfway through the miniseries, it goes in a very, 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 very different direction. But like, it is funny to me that the two of them like not just have some very similar stylistic choices, but also literally share a cast member.
If it ends with a weirdly chilling performance of Oklahoma, you'll know that something is amiss.
And I believe a stage adaptation of A Beautiful Mind.
Gosh, that must be true. Why would you make that up?
I will also say though, to speak about that, I think No Country for Old Men is not one of my favorite Cormac McCarthy novels, but I think it is one of my favorite Coen Brothers movies. Like, I think that is a case where the adaptation is better than the novel.
I don't like McCarthy. I spent years thinking I was trying to, right? Because like I was in undergrad and then grad school. I started undergrad 2004, finished my MFA 2011, and that was like, I feel like that was in some ways the height of the Cormac McCarthy craze. And I first read The Road, which when I read it as a college student who had barely read anything, really blew me away. I suspect it would not quite have that same impact now, but I did enjoy it. But like, I kept trying to read Blood Meridian, and I hated it. I hated the prose. I was miserable, but I kept trying to talk myself into thinking it was good. And like, after years of intermittently trying, I saw somebody post a quote that they really liked, and I thought it was one of the worst like excerpts I'd ever seen from a book. And this is, for folks who are not familiar, what I'm saying is that the thing that he is known to be one of the best at in the world, I think he sucks at. but that was my experience. And finally I gave up. It was like, turns out I don't like him. And there was a moment where I tried reading No Country for Old Men because I really liked the movie. And later I found out that it only became a novel because it was a failed screenplay, and it felt like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm wrong. How great is Blood Meridian?
I really like Blood Meridian. I think it's my favorite of his books I've read, but it's also like I can also completely see like there are a lot of, there are many critically acclaimed books and writers where I'm like just doesn't do it for me, like just in the same way that like this is a very weird thing to say, but like I was not taken, like the film Barbarian that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I was not a huge I did really enjoy Weapons. I did not like Barbarian, but like I know a lot of people who are like, "Oh, that movie, I fucking love that movie. I thought it was terrific." And it's just like, no, didn't, the choices did not work for me. Like, but that doesn't mean I thought it was a bad movie. It was just like, I'm not really interested in buying what this movie is selling.
My memory of that experience was that I found it very funny and I found it structurally very interesting, but that I didn't actually like anything that it did, like on its own terms, right? Like the way that it was presented and put together was really skillful and interesting.
Yeah.
But the actual story was kind of nothing, in a way that like ultimately I did like the movie despite that, but like I was not blown away.
I enjoyed the design of kind of the like increasingly like bizarre underground thing, and I enjoyed Justin Long's performance as just an absolutely despicable human being. Because I feel like he's usually this very affable, like lovable guy, and like just watching that same charm but just applied towards just like a genuinely someone who has just done just genuine terrible thing after terrible thing was interesting to watch. But like I feel also like the film Weapons did a lot of the same, like taking some structural risks and kind of playing around with questions of community and landscape and turning the familiar unfamiliar, just like did all of those things like much better for me. But like, again, like I'm not gonna, like, if I know plenty of people who really enjoy Barbarian, and like I'm not gonna take that away from them or just be like, no, you're wrong. Because as I get older, I think I am more and more picky about like, what are the hills I want to die on? And I'm like, it's not that.
As one gets closer to death, the dying on the hill feels a little bit more like it might happen.
Yeah.
I'll take you back a little bit though, because I did want to see if we could kind of get through the arc of this, just my personal curiosity. So when we sort of diverged from your hopefully as self-indulgent as you would like it to be life story, you were reading science fiction and Star Trek novelizations in middle or high school, which so far this has sounded a lot like my own experience, although I'm not nearly as fast a reader. I suspect I'm a lot slower these days. When I was a teenager, I was pretty quick, but it was because I had nothing else to do because I was homeschooled.
I mean, I also given the name of the podcast, I should also say, like, the public library. There was the county library, the Monmouth County Library Eastern Branch in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, played a very large role in me being a reader, and so did the Tinton Falls Public Library, which was affiliated with the Monmouth County Library, but was a much smaller thing and was right near the middle school where I went. My mom, when I was a kid, my mom would volunteer there, so like there would be times where we'd just be in this very small, very cozy library, and I spent a lot of time there. So middle school, high school, still reading a lot of genre stuff, but also starting to get into like I think somewhere around there was where the novel The Shipping News was published, and I remember reading that and really liking it. To jump back to McCarthy, I think that's also around when All the Pretty Horses was kind of ubiquitous, and I think I like borrowed a family friend's copy of that and read that. This is kind of weird, but I think also I would have been in high school for this. Multiple people, I think, recommending Peter Matthiessen to me. I think one family friend recommended At Play in the Fields of the Lord, which I read. And I think my paternal grandmother had recommended Killing Mr. Watson, which, and I read that and was also pretty taken with it. So somewhere in there is actually probably the book that kind of unlocked a lot of stuff for me, because I had pretty much thought like, okay, there is science fiction, fantasy, and there is adult fiction, and never the twain shall meet. Mm-hmm. And then in high school, I was assigned a lot of books in high school English classes, but in high school was where I encountered Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man for the first time. And like, there is a very short list of books that just like blew my brain open as far as like, oh, you can do this And like the way that Ellison did this very, I pretty much was like fantastical books or realistic books. And it's like, no, you can do this very stylized reality where it's not a fantasy novel, but it's also not like it's not a work of kitchen sink realism. And it was just like, oh my God, holy shit. Like this is really something. My junior year, my junior year, in my English class, who has since published a couple of books of poetry, which I really need to check out, but that's beside the point. Her thing for if you were in her English class was like you had to kind of write a paper. You had to pick an author. I think they had to be from the US because she was kind of going into like a lot of like, these are the overarching themes of American literature. And she was kind of like, I want you to like write about these writers and kind of analyze like themes across their work. And my gateway drug there was Tom Robbins, who is not a writer I have read in many, many years, but was also kind of one of those like, well, he's not in the science fiction section, but there's like weird shit going on in these books, and I think I'm gonna check those out. So like and my oldest friend was also I think is the guy who got me into Robbins, and so we were both like talking a lot about the novels of Tom Robbins, and then went off to college. Kind of kept going with a lot of my same reading habits. It's actually funny. And I think that was also where I started getting into like, I met some people who 30 years later are dear friends of mine because we were both like into indie rock and science fiction. Like my friends got me into, no, actually, no, they didn't get me into, we sort of bonded over the writings of Ian M. Banks. And like, that was how one friendship came up. Weirdly, I think when I'm thinking about me in college, the thing that maybe stands out the most, well, two things. One of them was we had a course on fiction by Black American authors taught by an aging white guy, which was always a little bit weird, but I think he also understood that this was kind of weird. But like that class was my introduction to like Ishmael Reed, and I think that was where I read like Gayl Jones's Corregidora for the first time. So like I think that might have been the first time I read Toni Morrison. So it was a lot of like, John Edgar Wideman's Philadelphia Fire, which was another big like opening up just a fucking section of my brain and just like showing like, oh, you can do some really, really interesting stuff here. And there was a different course. I think it was in the final semester I had in college. I would say undergrad, but I've never been in a graduate program. So just, and I remember this wasn't even a book we were assigned, but our professor had like, one of the things he wanted to discuss was, that was when Haruki Murakami's, I think was South of the Border, West of the Sun, had just been published in translation. And so he was kind of, I think it was the review that ran in the New York Times, and he kind of sent that around and kind of, we were talking about it, and I was like, this sounds really good. Also, it was interesting to me because it's a book about it's a book about an only child, and I am myself an only child, and so I like there's a little weird little thing, a little corner of my brain that's kind of like the only child canon, and that is And part of what intrigued me was like the fact that it's about an only child born in post-war Japan, where like one of the things I think Murakami brings up is like there were a lot of families that were like, we have survived this war, we have survived being under this authoritarian government, we had nuclear bombs dropped on us, we had fire bombs dropped on us, like we need to bounce back, we need to have lots of kids, and and how the protagonist of that book is like this very is an outlier because he's an only child. So that was also a book that kind of got under my skin. So also in the midst, and I think somewhere in college was where someone who grew up going to punk shows, these two names will not surprise you, started reading Jack Kerouac and started reading Raymond Carver.
Sure.
And also somewhere in the midst of all of this, do you know Adam Voith runs a journal called Little Engines? Read a press called TNI Books back in the day.
The name is familiar, but I'm going to say no.
Okay. So Adam and I met because this is, again, I am very much showing my age here. I would occasionally chat on AOL Instant Messenger with someone. So I was doing, I had started doing a zine mostly dedicated to like punk and indie bands when I was in high school or when I was in college. And so there was a guy who I'd met through that who was a publicist for a record label. And like we would just periodically chat about music. And one day I saw that he was online and I messaged him and it was Adam was on because he was house sitting for this guy. And then So, and then he and I just started talking. We just started talking about like punk bands and books. And when he launched his press, he's also how I met a few other people who were like, I'm still in touch with the writers Todd Dills and Susanna Feltz, both of whom live in Nashville. Essentially, when Adam was getting his press off the ground, he was inviting people to contribute like blogs. This was like 2001. Right. And I had a blog there, and so did Todd, and so did Susanna. And the two of them ended up meeting and getting married, and it's very adorable. But the two of them are also just frighteningly good writers. Todd also edited a literary broadsheet called The Second Hand, which is like basically where I had like my first like really big publication. And those, they're good folks and they're good writers. And when I read in Nashville, and God, it has been 9 years now, but like, got to hang out with them and drink bourbon and talk about punk rock. So that was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And Susanna has a book coming out, I think, on Tri-Quarterly Press later this year, which I'm excited to read because her first book, which was published by Featherproof a while back, was also very good and was also in the sort of the only child canon, is in my sort of only child canon that is a bookshelf that is imaginary, but it is right over here.
Is there like one main, like the most only child canon book of them all?
There probably is, but I don't honestly, like, I would have to sit down and like,
yeah.
I would have to turn this from like an imaginary thing to something that is like, okay, 10 books. This is kind of like, as someone who grew up in Jersey, I have like my New Jersey canon shelf, but my New Jersey canon shelf, like I could probably name 4 to 5 books now, but it would actually be much, much larger.
Yeah. I mean, I ask questions like that with, if I'm honest, there's a small spirit of sadism in it because like it's the exact sort of question I can't answer, right? But whenever anybody asks me what's your favorite anything, I'm like, I don't know, man. It depends.
Yeah.
Like,
I freeze up when I get asked, like, what are you, like, something like, have you read any good books lately? And I'm just like, oh, no. I don't know. What's a book?
It's so hard. It's funny because like with doing this podcast, I should be like preloaded to answer that at all times, and I kind of am. And like part of my issue, I don't know if this is a problem that you have, but because maybe the nice way to say it is hypercritical. Like often when I want to say that I'm reading something that I enjoy, I do then like rattle off like 10 complaints about it. It's really hard for me to just like say I'm reading this and it's great and you should check it out unless it is truly like blowing my mind. And like usually even that like a set of 10 complaints is like, you're describing how the thing works as much as you're describing what you don't like about it. So often the things that are a little bit frustrating are also just like, well, this is a feature of the text. We could not have the things that I like without the things that I don't like about this, right? So it's, I think sometimes for folks who are new to that approach, it can seem like I hate everything, which was like more true when my mood disorder was a little bit worse and is less true now that it's a little bit better.
That is good to hear.
So what I guess I'll skip forward a little bit. I'm curious how you feel about the experience. And I know you started this by saying that things were kind of depressing in the world. And I feel like I'm going to ask you a depressing question here, but I'm hoping it's interesting to answer as well. Fine. But like, how does it feel being a working critic at this point? Like how's that felt for the last couple of years? How's it feel currently? What's your experience of it?
It is weird. It is often disheartening. I think I was at a panel about a month ago, maybe, that was sort of about the future of book criticism that the writer and translator and editor Samuel Rutter was moderating. And Becca Rothfeld, who'd up until recently been at the Washington Post, and I think is now at the New Yorker, was one of the panelists. And I think one of the things, that was, I am sad as a book critic that getting something published in the Washington Post was always something I had kind of hoped for, because it's like one of the big papers. And so seeing that paper has lost, has lost that section, but also like to hear like people who work there say like, no, we actually had a pretty solid audience. We were doing fairly well. Like the section itself was doing fairly well. The management just decided they didn't want to have this anymore. And I think that's the really frustrating thing, because it's like, if you are creating, if it's one thing, it's like we were doing this thing and nobody was reading it and it was a giant financial hole, that it's like, oh, okay, well, but it's like we were doing this thing and people seem to be behind it. Like one of the things that I think about a lot. I mean, I moderated a virtual panel for the NBCC earlier in the year. We're talking about like the role of newsletters and sort of literary criticism, but more broadly arts criticism. Like we had one of the editors of The Reveal there who's been doing really great film work. But I think one of the things that I am trying to figure out, and I don't know if I think this is a good thing or a bad thing, like I'm very happy. Like I think I'm on the masthead of Zona Motel. I like a lot of what Zona Motel is doing. I like a lot of what the Metropolitan Review has been doing. Like I think it's been good to see that people are willing to pay for, people are starting new publications and people are willing to pay for them. I think all of that is great. But I also, I was thrilled when Book Forum was reborn. But I think the one thing that gives me some pause is like, are we at a point where the future of everything is just going to be like, okay, here is exactly, people are going to kind of get something that they are looking for. Like I want books covered, so I'm paying for it, as opposed to like, I'm getting a newspaper or a magazine and like, hey, I'm going to flip through this and like, oh, this thing on a book looks interesting. Maybe I'm going to check this book out. Because, there was a point where I've always been a nerd. I was reading Locus magazine when I was in middle school and high school, which is like mostly reviews of science fiction, fantasy, and horror novels. And so I was getting a lot of books that way. Like that's kind of how I got into the writer Steve Erickson, for instance. But I also think, when I do research, I've done some nonfiction research here and there. And sometimes when I'm looking through like the newspaper in my home, the big newspaper in my hometown, like articles from the 70s where it's like there was like jazz criticism, and not like a syndicated jazz review, but like there was someone who lived in like this part of Monmouth County, New Jersey, who was like a good enough writer about jazz that, he was writing periodically about jazz records and presume, or when you read about like the Village Voice in its heyday. I mean, I was reading the Trisha Romano oral history of it, was terrific. And I feel like every once in a while, like I'm a subscriber to Robert Christgau's Substack, and there are times, I think he's very good about sort of talking about all of the writers who have passed through there. I mean, I believe like Colson Whitehead was like writing book reviews for the Voice in the early 90s, when like pre The Intuitionist. And it's just like, but I think there is also something about like, the alt weekly model that, just doesn't seem to exist anymore. And while I think it's great that people are paying for reviews via newsletters, or like, I always happy whenever I see like Defector running a books piece. I think they had an interview with Damali Serpell on pretty recently. It's also like, I want there to be more of that. And that's depressing. And the AI thing is depressing for so many reasons. I mean, at the time that we're recording this is like a few days after it was discovered that someone who had written a book review published by the New York Times Book Review had used AI to do it. And God, that's just, I mean, it infuriates me just like on a general principle, but also because it's like there are so many people I know who would love to have a byline in the New York Times, where it's like who would not use ChatGPT or whatever their AI of choice is to like come up with their book review. And when I look at the biography of the guy who got busted for it, it's like this is clearly like an intelligent person, where it's just like you couldn't write 1,200 words on a book. So.
No, it's depressing. And like, there's a temptation to make some sort of a practical argument about this, but I don't particularly feel the need. My feeling about this is that arts are one of the nice things we do for ourselves. And so we should do them for ourselves, and we should not let the robot take over and do it for us, because then the robot gets to have the fun and it's not even having fun. If it were having fun, I'd be interested to see that. You mentioned the thing with the Washington Post book section, like actually having an audience. And like, that is a really tough one to deal with. And it like, The thing that blew my mind that happened in that same moment was that the Post killed its sports section, which like if you like you said, it would be one thing if this were a money losing enterprise, but like killing your sports section is madness. Like that's just I want my paper to die at that point because that's something that people actually want. And like, I do find myself wondering more and more as like all these venues close themselves down, like they kind of commit, suicide for like somebody's brief, usually I feel illusory financial gain. Like, I don't think Bezos is getting richer as a result of any of that stuff he did. He's probably getting poorer, but I mean, it kind of feels like the AI thing where it's like, what do people think life is for? What are we spending our money on? This is one of the deep mysteries for me is like because I think that there is a belief among a lot of people that like the jazz critic existed in your example way back when because there was like more money floating around or something. And like, that's not the case. The country is richer now than it was then. You can afford to have more people doing weird little niche things now than you could then. And that's probably going to continue to be true going forward. Part of what happened there is that we now can measure who is reading what. And that definitely, it turns out most people aren't reading most things or interacting with most things. So that's an issue. But I mean, again, the sports section example really kind of makes you question how much what is the driving force behind this. And I've gotten to the point where it's like, now it feels like so many different cultural venues, platforms, creative, whatever, have collapsed that it feels like we must have something on the way to fill that gap because I simply do not believe that there is not demand for these things. I think it might be weirder and harder to like turn that demand into money. And that may be a genuine, huge problem going forward, but it's so strange and confusing to me that we seem to be choosing to make our own lives less interesting at every turn for no apparent gain. You mentioned Defector. And like, I think that there's been a number of like encouraging examples of this, right? But they tend to follow a model that is a little hard to reproduce, which is, I follow a video game site called Remap that was previously they were Waypoint, and then Vice shut down Waypoint and they spun off and became Remap. And the reason they could do that was that they had a podcast that lots of people listen to that created, the parasocial connection and that gave them a sort of quasi celebrity and convinced people to spend money on them. So it feels like the model has increasingly become what you do is you get someone in a moment of irrational exuberance to pay you to write, to perform, to make art in public or whatever at an established venue, a Washington Post, a Vice, or whatever. And then that thing dies for no apparent reason. And if you've gotten slightly famous, you can monetize your fame and kind of launch your own new thing. And maybe like those new things are going to hire up in the future, the Flaming Hydra is growing, Aftermath is growing. Like there are examples of these things taking on a life of their own, but it does seem like really slippery and difficult. And it feels like the models to do that in a way that is like at all bootstrappable versus launching off of a big platform, it seems really hard, but it feels like it should be possible. I just don't know what to think of some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's also notable that like Defector, the site that you mentioned that sort of grew out of Vice, Hearing Things, which is a bunch of former Pitchfork staffers, like in a lot of cases, it is like you have this sort of you have a group of people who, I mean, it's not the best of both worlds, but it's like people who know that they already they know that they can work together. So it's not just like, will this newsroom, or will this editorial venture work? Because it's like, well, we know that it does because like we've all worked together before and we know, who's good at what and, what, and everything else. So
no, that's true. That is a nicer That is a nice aspect of this that I hadn't thought about so much, that it's not just that they're able to monetize the quasi celebrity that comes with personality driven internet content, but that they actually have working relationships that they know can get them through some things in a way where, like, if you and I were to start a publication tomorrow, it would be like we both have like one foot out the door. Like, well, obviously I've got no idea if I can trust Mike. I've never worked with him. He could be a total asshole. Like, it is hard to build that faith. And that's true that those publications are really, it's really important. It's an important resource. And it's something that is a little more humanizing and a little nicer to think about than the parasocial podcast machine.
Yeah. I remain very curious about, well, I was reading something that was talking about how I think Vox Media was apparently looking into like selling off its podcasts, which struck me as weird, but also the fact that we are now in this weird, like the growth of the, I mean, we are recording this on video. So like the growth of the video podcast, like I think Netflix doing deals that are kind of like, hey, do you want to watch your favorite podcast? I mean, I'm fond of the movie podcast Across the Movie Aisle, which I think recently kind of began, which I just listened to on my phone because I'm like, I can watch it and it's similar to this, where it's, the three hosts just all at their desks talking into a microphone. And I'm like, I don't really need to see three people sitting at a desk at home office.
No.
I can turn on the mirror and see that myself. But like, apparently there is demand for it, which like, to be fair, I think from having listened to the hosts of it, I think they're also kind of like, I'm not sure why someone would rather watch this at, when like the visuals are not like, it's not like we're showing clips from the movies or, bringing up a whiteboard. It's just like, here are three people talking.
Yeah, I don't. So like I do record this using a video platform, but it's honestly, it's because it provides good infrastructure and it allows me to successfully take turns speaking. Because I have the visual of the other person, and it's harder if you can only hear them. But like I don't think I'll ever upload any of these videos anywhere because I don't understand the appeal of the video podcast. I watched the Doughboys one a couple times just because it seemed like they put some real effort into it, and I was curious, like, what is the best version of this? And the best version of it is never going to be better than the thing that I'm doing while I listen to a podcast and don't look at it. Like, getting the dishes done is genuinely more exciting for me than watching any podcaster do anything.
Yeah. There's also like, I mean, most of the podcasts I listen to are interviews or people talking about art or politics or music or occasionally soccer. But like, I also, there's a writer named Julian Simpson who's done a bunch of work for the BBC. And like, when I was on the road 2 years ago doing like some book tour stops across, basically driving out to AWP and doing some readings along the way and along the way back, like I was listening, and he does a lot of just like basically like radio shows where it's just like sort of science fiction, cosmic horror tinged stuff. And part of the fun of listening to that is the fact that it's like you don't need, what can you evoke with just audio? Like you're not, you don't have to worry about, that. And also like, what can you do differently with storytelling where like there's one very, very creepy sound effect that runs through one of the shows that he's written. And it's just like, I'm enjoying this as its own thing, not thinking like if at some point he was just like, we're making this a TV show, like I would probably watch it. But I also feel like it would be its own thing because it's like you would be doing something, you would have to do something differently. You're not just relying on,
No, I mean it is funny thinking about the like the way that like at this point you monetize art primarily by getting it turned into a Netflix series or whatever, and then and people mostly, and that's because people mostly don't read books, and then they mostly don't watch the Netflix. They listen to it while they are doing other stuff. And that's why most Netflix productions are like they're basically radio plays, which to an extent has always been true of television. And there's a way in which I like that about television. I like that it is kind of a humble form often, in a way where like it is willing to just sort of fit into your life and let you do the laundry or the dishes or whatever. But I keep coming back to this feeling of like, okay, we're not reading things really. We're not listening to things. It gets onto Netflix and then we don't actually watch it while it's there. Like, what is anybody doing?
Yeah.
What is anyone doing to enjoy their life? Is it just that everyone is working too much? Is that what is killing art? I don't understand.
I mean, I sometimes wonder, like, I've seen some arguments to this effect on like Blue Sky. I mean, I do wonder if part of it is, yeah, just like that there has been a point where our billionaire overlords, speaking somewhat sarcastically, but also not, have just decided like, well, why don't we just have people working 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, and they're sleeping the rest of it, and anything else is work, and there's no real reason for people to do anything else. I mean, I think back to like my maternal grandfather, who I never knew, but when I hear my mom talk about him, like he was a guy, did not go to college, worked for the Erie Lackawanna Railroad for most of his adult life, but was also like an avid classical music guy and like played the flute. And it's like one of the things that I come back to. I think it's a quote by Brian Eno where he said something about the idea that like art is not, people should just be able to, like, if you want to paint, you should just be able to, like, you should have access to make art. Like,
yeah,
not necessarily because like you want to be a professional artist, but just because like if you find it fulfilling, that is the reason for it. Like if you find playing a musical instrument fulfilling, like that is enough. And I think, I don't know, I am not enough of a like political theorist or economic theorist to go too far down the line, but I do wonder if we are getting to a point of, especially in the US, where, I remember seeing a chart that was something like productivity in the US has just gone way, way, way up, but has not kept pace with wages. And I think some of that is that like there is this sort of bootstrappy, like you've got to, if you're not working, doing a job, everything else is foolhardy. That is part of the idea of America to kind of bring things full circle to the whole. I also feel like the arts have kind of started to become partisan coded in a way that 50 years ago they weren't. When I look back at like, I'm a big fan of the podcast Know Your Enemy. It's about sort of two hosts who are very much men of the left talking about a lot of like conservative history. But like one of the things that you read about, and this also came up, I was reading Sam Tannenhouse's biography of William F. Buckley last year, is like the National Review published like some astonishingly good writers.
Right.
And I think some of that was like, like Joan Didion got her start writing for the National Review. And like, whereas and I know that there are still conservative leaning literary journals and whatever else, but I feel like there is this sort of cultural divide and that happened, I think, somewhat gradually. But my pet theory is that the late 80s, early 90s debates in Congress over NEA funding are kind of the key moment where this happened. But I could be completely wrong about that. But I think like it also just means that like reading and music, for the most part, like obviously there's a lot of conservative country musicians. There's a fair number of conservatives in hip hop, as apparently the brouhaha over like Nicki Minaj shows. But like, I feel like by and large, most art that people are talking about is coming from like, at the very least, a left of center place, whether that's like very left, very, very close to the center or not. And like, whereas 50, 60 years ago, and obviously I think some of it is also, the arts worlds are all becoming more diverse. And so the sort of racism, etc., that were kind of implicit in many of those, sexism that were implicit in many of those worlds, I mean, are no longer possible, which is good. The whole controversy over like, I don't know how up to speed how much time you spend in like the science fiction world, but the sad puppies and rabid puppies controversies of about a decade ago.
Yeah, that sort of Gamergate, but for science fiction, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And I feel like the writer Elizabeth Sandifer has written a lot of really smart things about this. But part of it is like, I think it's very easy for some people, most of whom are straight white guys, to convince themselves that like, if they don't necessarily like something that is not by someone who looks like them, that is not just like, it's not their thing, but just like, well, clearly this is inferior, but it is only successful because of who the author is. And
right.
Like it just, I don't know, it just seems to be like, or it's just not your thing and that's cool. And like, you don't have to be, a jackass about it. I feel like, the whole puppies imbroglio is very much just seems like a case of a lot of some people who I think are just like, well, it's not like it used to be where you could just, I like Robert A. Heinlein and stories of space troopers going and shooting up aliens, and some people who are like outright just fucking white supremacists who are like, no, like, I want stories about that reflect my worldview of white people being the superior race. And like, I mean, it's bad either way, but it's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of my great sadnesses in life, in the show, in general, is that like we really genuinely cannot do an episode where we don't talk about Trump. And that's like the thing about him that is so damaging. And that like, I really don't think that people who don't remember what it was like before, and you got a few years on me, so you've got a few more years of like living before this shit. Like I had a few solid years as an adult where this wasn't what it was like, and then it was. But like, I think that he is genuinely the source of so much that is so bad for us in a way that like I don't think has been true historically of other presidents. And the reason that I think that, and the reason that like I really agree that the polarization of our attitudes around art has gotten wildly out of proportion where what it used to be, is that he's like the fundamental thing. I don't think that he's a talented man. I don't think he's an interesting man. I don't think he's an intelligent man. I think he has one skill, which is smearing his shit on everything and making it so that if you think of yourself as a conservative, you have been eating his shit and you have been covering yourself in his shit and you have been signing on for more of his shit for so long that you have to live a small, stupid, miserable life in order to be able to look yourself in the mirror. Because if you had any like interiority, if you were allowing yourself to like think about other people as real people, and you're allowing yourself to have interesting, complicated feelings and intellectual experiences and stuff, you couldn't stay on board. And so you have to, like, truly mentally, you have to cripple yourself. You have to turn your brain off in a way that I think people have not quite realized they've been doing more and more and more for the last 10 years. And like, I genuinely think that when he goes, inshallah, I think that there will be a real opportunity for us to like start living our lives again, to start like culturally interacting with each other. Because like Bush was dumb, but he didn't require you to be the world's dumbest piece of shit to think that he like, there was at least an illusion of competence and an illusion of professionalism or whatever, of expertise in the surrounding people that made it possible to not be the dumbest motherfucker on earth and still support them. You shouldn't do it. Like, it wasn't a good idea. And he was definitely on the road to where we are now. But like, it was not the same thing. And people who do not remember that, I think it's going to be hard for them to believe how different this is. And I mean, I hope to God it's more different in the future. I do. Like, so my explanation for like why we aren't living our lives is like 50% that asshole just being a black hole at the center of all thought and human experience, even outside the country. And then, I mean, like, if I had to guess where the time is going that we used to spend on art and things other than work, I have to assume that the phone scrolling genuinely is quite disastrous for people. I have to think it's crowding out more art for most than it is for me, because I don't like my phone. I don't like scrolling on it very much. I have a bad time when I do it. So I don't lose too much time, but I get the sense that a lot of people, if they had a little timer running, would be pretty shocked about like how much TikTok is eating of their day.
Yeah. I have a TikTok account, which I have not been on there in a while. And actually part of it is because I have a friend who will periodically send me videos, and like, I like the videos he sends me, so I'll take a look. And like, I've posted occasionally, like, talking about books, because I'm like, if I'm going to be on this, I might as well do something, theoretically, that is a net positive. But like, part of it, like, I've been on there and I'm like, oh God, I could just be on this for 3 hours and not do anything else. I mean, I certainly spent a lot of time on Twitter pre-Elon, and that is something, I mean, I do and don't regret it, because like there are friends I have met through Twitter circa 10, 12 years ago, and there were professional relationships I have that came about as a result of that. I think arguably there was a relationship I was in that kind of grew out of some Twitter interaction. So like all of that is positive, but I think just, I'm on Blue Sky and I like being on Blue Sky, but I'm not, I think I'm very much like trying to not be on there all the time because like it is very easy to get, it's also just very easy to like get pulled into, and I feel like was especially true in literary Twitter in the late 2010s and early 2020s, where like there would be a lot of just like very angry pile-ons. And part of it's just like there were and still are very important conversations that need to be had, but it's like, I'm sorry, like some of the shit that needs to be talked about is something that needs to go, that where you need more than 140 or 280 characters, and you do not need a situation that rewards someone just just jumping in and being like, well, I think you're a fucking asshole, and getting 50 likes. Because I mean, I can remember one literary disagreement. I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to go into details, but I can remember, and it was something that involved people I like on both sides, so it was a very painful thing to watch. But I remember there was a certain point where like I was looking like a little bit further down to see like, because at first I would see people I knew kind of chiming in and voicing their opinions, and then there was a certain point where I would see people like chiming in and being like, yeah, fuck yeah, like cheering on, and I'd be like, who is this person? And you can kind of see the who is on here that who do you follow in common? And I'm like, this person does not seem to follow anyone I follow, including any of the people who are part of this discussion. So it's like, are you just posting because is this just like, is this a bot that's like just programmed to kind of stir up shit? Is this someone who just wants that little, the little dopamine rush of like feeling righteous about something? Is this something else entirely? And it's just, that was, I think, a point where I was like, okay, something is off here, because like, it is one thing. It's like, if you are like, I support this person, or I'm going to defend this person, and I want to step into this disagreement and like, but it's like, if you have no connection whatsoever to a disagreement that's happening, it's like, what is happening? What is going on?
Right. The context collapse thing where I mean, I'm fortunate. I've never truly been piled onto. I am very disciplined about if I have an interaction that I don't like, I go dark. If I get attention from a big account, I usually immediately delete everything that could get me further attention, because I don't want it. But like, it's funny, it's sad, it's frustrating, because like, that person in any other context, if you saw that in real life, you'd have no question about what was going on, right? You'd be like, well, that person's an asshole. I don't have to care what they think, because they just wandered in off the street and started yelling at me. But Twitter made that feel natural. I think Blue Sky's culture has been helpful in making that kind of thing feel a little bit less normal. And the block features there are a big help. The fact that you really kind of can extricate yourself unless you really get unlucky. I feel like we have had years and years now of people just kind of swimming in systems that incentivize casual cruelty. And I don't know. I look forward to when that's not happening. I hope that at some point we notice that we hate it, because we do. I don't think we're having a good time.
Yeah. It seems notable to me that, I mean, I'm a single person in his late 40s who lives alone. So like, I do not always have as much social interaction as I would like. And I would say, like, I was at AWP this year, and that was really great, because I was talking to a lot of people I know and like, and, felt a sense of community, and like was hanging out with like the Zona Motel folks. And I was feeling a really great sense of community there, that I don't always feel even when I'm, at home here, in New York. And I think beyond just like the sense of like art and creativity, I think that goes hand in hand with the sense of community. And I mean, there's, the book Bowling Alone, that was kind of like arguing that like some of our problems are just because we do not have, decades ago, there were places where people would go that now we do not have. And I think for all that, God help me, for quoting this man for all that Elon Musk, talked about like Twitter/X as the modern town square.
Right.
It's like, but it's not really, because like in the modern town square, like in theory, you're interacting with people. I don't even want to say that. I don't even think it's the in-person side of it that is, because like there are many dear friends. Like one of my closest friends is someone who I met on Usenet in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't think that necessarily there's a problem with meeting people in an online space, but I also think there is something about Twitter and, to a lesser extent, Blue Sky and maybe Threads, which I theoretically am on occasionally, but am not really on that frequently, where it's just you don't necessarily get that, because it's the version of you that is on social media is probably not, it's sort of an edited and polished version of your actual self. I mean, to some extent,
Yeah.
and look, to some extent, everyone does that in every situation that they're in.
That's why I'm so slick. Because I'm always curating the impression.
But I think there's just something that we've lost, and I think some of that is also maybe goes back to the like, well, we can maybe monetize, I don't know, social media in a way that like other things could not be. I mean, not hilariously, but my first job out of college was working for a company. This was in the dot-com boom. It was a weird time, but I was working for a company called Deja.com, which was formerly Deja News, which was the website that you could go to access Usenet if you didn't just have like a Usenet browser. Because when I was first going on Usenet, and I should probably quantify, Usenet were these like different forums that were like, I spent a lot of time on like alt.music.hardcore, for instance. There was like alt.music.punk. There were kind of whatever kind of subculture you wanted, you were curious about, there was probably something there. And like, I would get into it through, because I was doing this when I was in college. So I had like a way of like going into it that way. But like, if you wanted to get to it another way, you could go through Deja News, which became Deja.com, which decided to kind of pivot to product reviews, and kind of still keeping the access to the Usenet forums, but not really having that there. And then I think they eventually sold that off to Google, I believe, after the company kind of imploded in the early 2000s. But like, I do think, I mean, I do and I don't. Like, I don't want to romanticize Usenet because, I mean, again, I have made friendships through that, and that's great. But I also remember like just a lot of super random people talking shit. And one dude who would basically every time there was a thread would talk about funk metal. That was his thing. He would just be like, but what about, hey, this new Lifetime 7-inch is really good. Like, they suck. They're not funk metal. On the other hand, I remember who that person is, like, decades later. So like, I'm going to be like an old man on my deathbed. And like, so we're like, do you have any last words? Like, that guy who said funk metal was weird. And they'll be like, what the fuck? That'll be my rosebud.
Yeah. No, I use that as like, I missed Usenet by like 2 years or something. But it was still a thing when I got online, but it was definitely like, I think college was how a lot of people were finding it. And I was an 11-year-old on AOL using the chat rooms and the forums there, which, had their own charm. But yeah,
can I tell my favorite AOL chat story?
Please.
So I was on AOL in college, and someone messaged me and they were like, "Hey buddy." And I saw that like they were based somewhere in New Jersey. So I was like, oh, maybe this is someone I went to high school with. Again, I think I'm in college at the time. So I was like, maybe it's someone I went to high school with. Maybe it's someone I met like through zine stuff or through music or whatever. So I'm just like, hey. And we're just talking, and he's like, hey. And then at some point we're just back and forth, and I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? And then he says, hey. And it's not the nature of this request is not what got me, but the phrasing that he used, which is to say, he said, do you want to wrestle? And then this is the phrasing that gets me. Not for sport, just for fun. And like, I have still not written a story or a novel called Not for Sport, Just for Fun, but at some point I'm going to, because
that's good.
And then actually hilariously, he's like, wait, how much do you weigh? And I was just like, and he's like, do you weigh more than this? And I was like, I do. And he's like, oh, maybe we shouldn't wrestle. It's like, okay, dude, that was a very easy out for what I thought was going to be a very, very uncomfortable conversation.
Did he feel that you were like, he's like, I'm a welterweight. You'll kick my ass.
I think he was a pretty little guy. Like, and I think he was, which again, I guess this is an occupational hazard of like, if you're propositioning dudes for fun wrestling, but like, wouldn't you lead with like, are we in the same weight class?
As if that was important to me. Yeah.
Because also it would suck if like if I had been like, yeah, dude, fuck yeah, this sounds great. And he was like, oh, actually, like, we are not compatible bodies. Like, and then we're both disappointed. Like, we're both like, fuck, man, we were really, that was gonna be a fun wrestle. and now it's gone.
So it sounds like it's not your sense that this was euphemistic, because of course, like with the internet, that's like my first suspicion, right?
I think it was I think it was maybe like there's some wrestling and then maybe the night goes as it were. Like, I don't know.
Right. There's a transition roughly like the one from instant messaging to wrestling, from wrestling to something else, something with roughly that level of, maybe more logical, actually. I'd say the gap between AIM and wrestling is pretty large compared to the gap between wrestling and sex.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I was watching Barton Fink last night, and the scene in which John Goodman offers to show John Turturro some wrestling moves, and then like later John Turturro's being interrogated, and he's like, "Sex? He's a man. We wrestled," which is just one of the most beautifully delivered lines in a Coen Brothers film. I think.
Gosh, I'm trying to think if I have any. All of my stories like that are dirty and not even in a particularly funny way. Just a lot of like randomly being propositioned as a teenager by people of all origins. Nobody asked me to wrestle though, which is, now I'm disappointed retroactively. I think the closest I got was like playing chess with people.
I will say this did not involve being propositioned. But I do have a very good story from New Year's Eve, 99 to 2000.
Tell me.
So I should preface this by saying I was like, this was, I think, this was my first New Year's out of college. And for most of college, I had been straight edge. And then at some point I stopped being straight edge. And I got very, very into, there was a hard cider on the market called Cider Jack. And it was an alcoholic cider. There was like a raspberry one, I think, that I was very into. The packaging had kind of like a woodcut aesthetic. I still look back on that with some fondness, but it also led to some misadventures. I was also very into drinking amaretto, which would get me in trouble several months after this story. But I was at a party at a friend's cousin, the cousin of a friend of mine. My friend had invited me, and he's like, "Oh, he usually throws these wild parties," and like this was Y2K. So like, it's like, what if the world comes to an end? Like, you want to be at a crazy party, right? So I'm at the party and I'm drinking some cider jack, and I had planned to spend the night. So I'd driven out to, it was in Jersey City. I parked, went to the thing, drank some ciders before midnight. Midnight came. There was not a blackout. The world did not end. So great. Then some more people showed up, and then I smoked weed for the first time, and then I drank some amaretto, and then I passed out on the couch, and then at some point I woke up because there was a very strange feeling. This feeling I have never felt before or since. I was wearing a flannel shirt and an undershirt on, and the undershirt was tucked into my pants. And I felt there was something twisting around in my belly button, they had not gone all the way to my skin. They were doing this, like their hand was under my flannel, but it was not through the undershirt.
Okay.
And
so we're poking the undershirt into the belly button.
With a very long fingernail, or a somewhat long fingernail. And I sort of come to, and there's a woman who I'd met earlier in the night who was a few years my senior. So like, she was like in her late 20s. And I think I was just like, oh, she is a sophisticated older woman, which is one of those things that's just like hilarious to me now. And she's twisting her fingernail And I begin to realize several things at once. The first of them is that I cannot move my body from the neck down. I have like slight neck control and I can move my eyes, and that's about it. The second thing is that I do not seem to be able to speak.
Oh no.
The third thing that I realize is that this woman is saying a phrase, and what she is saying over and over again in a tone of voice that I would describe as sultry is, "This is a whole lot of man." This is a whole lot of man. And then comes the fourth thing that I realize, which is that sitting on the couch opposite, about 5 feet opposite me, is a man. And then I start to realize, oh yeah, I was introduced to them earlier, that lady, and that's her husband.
Yeah, yeah.
And he is just looking at me with like, with a look that will just describe like, I will murder you. So I am attempting to signal to this man using only my eyes of like, dude, I don't know what the fuck is going on. I've been on, up until 30 seconds ago, I was unconscious. I did not ask for this. Please do not beat the shit out of me. And then I think, thankfully, I passed back out.
That is honestly, that's your best. You just hope to do that. Wake up alive on the other end, and whatever, however you got there, you got there.
So yeah,
my 99 to 2000 New Year's Eve was a bit different from that. I would have been, gosh, I suppose I should be able to do the math on this, right? I would have been like 13, and I went to one of my homeschool friends' house. I had a friend who was also homeschooled. He was probably my best friend at the time. And his family had a little more money than mine, and the way that they had chosen to invest some of that money because of the concerns about the Y2K bug was they had set up with canned food and generators, and if it came to it, they were going to be okay, was their thinking. They were taking sort of a survivalist route. And I remember, because it was genuinely unclear to the average person back then whether the problem had been solved yet. And then we all took away, when nothing happened, that it had never been a problem. And now if you talk to people who actually know how that all worked, that makes them feel insane, because the reason nothing happened was that a lot of people worked very hard.
Yeah.
But we didn't know that those people had done that work and solved those problems. So when midnight rolled around, you're like, I don't know if the planes are going to crash, if the house is going to be, I don't know. And I remember being there at 10 and seeing their prepper stuff and being like, what happens to my family, which is the guest of this family, if it all goes to hell in this home? They have not budgeted green beans for all of us. Right?
Oh,
we'll have to leave, right? I think what would have happened, they weren't going to kill us, but I think that what would have happened is they would have been like, well, it was good to have you. Good night. And then we would have wandered off into the darkness and tried to drive home in our now broken car or whatever. And then we would have starved to death. And they, meanwhile, are enjoying their green beans, which was for me, that was a beautiful dramatization of the futility of so many libertarian fantasy scenarios. It's like, okay, you, my best friend, have green beans and will live. I am going to die from a lack of canned green beans. How much do you feel you've accomplished? How proud are you right now?
Oh man. or in the post-apocalyptic future, the green beans will become currency.
Yeah. No, you'll be rich. You'll buy and sell me.
I do enjoy the Fallout games, and I've been enjoying the show as well, but I love the idea that bottle caps in the future are what currency is.
Yeah. I get so distracted every time I start thinking about that. I cannot walk down that road, because every single time it's like, well, what do they want it for? I mean, I understand that it's, in a way, it's a scarce resource and it's countable, so that's kind of good for currency, but this is a very crude economy. I feel like it needs to be a little bit more of a literal store of value. It needs to be like a battery or a bullet or water. Things people need. And I've spent too much time trying to figure out if there's any way that makes sense.
I was wondering if I'm sure there has been some debate over, I mean, I guess in theory you could melt it's metal, so you could melt it down and turn
You
it back
could.
into something. But like, I would also imagine it's not very like you probably could not make a bullet casing out of an old bottle cap, or maybe you could.
I couldn't, but in the future.
Yeah.
Well, we have gone far afield. I do want
Yes,
to.
indeed.
I wanna respect your time. But I want to thank you for being on the show. There's a couple little bits of business I like to do. One is you talked about your love of the public library in your youth. Obviously, I was a huge fan. I was a big participant in the summer reading programs through which I earned my own library pizzas, my own little personal pan pizzas from Pizza Hut purchased with the coupon you got from reading enough books. I've gotten the sense talking to people for this show that this may be a little bit of a regional thing. So I'm curious, did you participate in that sort of program, and was a pizza one of the rewards?
I believe it was. Without revealing secrets of the NBCC board, I will say that like there is a moment when we get into the deliberations where there is a tool that we use that alludes to the library Pizza Hut.
Oh man.
And I was aware, and I know when my colleague on the board who created this kind of, I was like, yes, I know what that is. So I'm pretty sure I got some pizzas out of the deal. Because also literally like there was literally like in the town of Shrewsbury, New Jersey, like there was a Pizza Hut like probably a mile and a half from the public library branch that was there.
Dangerous proximity. You just wander over. Yeah. I did that, and my other big library, I don't remember if I've mentioned this on the show before or not. My other big library reading program acquisition was I got movie tickets, got like vouchers for movie tickets. And so I took my mom to see Titanic and saw boobs on the big screen for the first time in my life. Because I was like 10 or 11 or something. And like, I mean, positive experience overall. Enjoyed the boobs, enjoyed the movie. I don't think it holds up, but it was a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am. Unfortunately, I know where I was when I saw Kate Winslet's breasts, and it was sitting directly next to my mother.
My mom, for most of my childhood and young adulthood, and even like parts of my adulthood, for a while, had the habit of, if I was ever watching a movie and there would be nudity or violence or like extreme profanity, she would just like wander in and just be like, and just would give me this very disappointed look. I think my favorite was, have you ever seen the movie State of Grace?
No.
It is a early 90s crime drama about Irish American gangsters in Hell's Kitchen. It stars Sean Penn and Gary Oldman, I think, are the two leads. And Gary Oldman is just, I don't even know what Gary Oldman's accent is supposed to be, but he is just like, there's a point where Sean Penn is saying something about like, they're talking about like, like Gary Oldman's explaining like, well, we're going to actually like really give the money back to the community after we steal it. And Sean Penn's like, oh, so we're like Robin Hood. And Gary Oldman, as this hard living Irish American gangster, just says something like, yeah, and I'm Friar Fuck. And like, literally, like, I'm just watching this and like, and then just like, I just hear like a disappointed sigh coming from next to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I won't recount them here, but I am haunted by several moments of like accidental obscenity around my mom that I will never stop feeling that little bit of shame over. The time I mispronounced the word pushy.
No.
And my mom thought I'd said it on purpose, and I was like 8, and I was like, I don't even know what this means. I thought so. As a result, for years, I thought that the word pussy referred to a breast, because that was all I could think of that would be upsetting to my mom for me to say when I was like 8. That took me a while to figure out.
There was a thing I realized, at some point of growing up, because like when I was a kid, my dad never cursed. And my mom, if she was ever cursing, would just shout, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
Yeah.
And so I think I just like realized, I think I was just like, oh, okay, my mother doesn't curse. And there was a certain point where I realized, oh no, Toby, your mom curses a fair amount. And she just did a very good job of holding it all back when she was around, her small non-adult son. Because it's just like, yeah, it's like now that she's like, oh no, I'm not gonna say my mom curses like a sailor because she doesn't, but like she certainly, yeah, she's they're in her lexicon.
My family teases me because I still won't swear in front of my mom. I'll swear just about anywhere else, but it just feels disrespectful, which is weird because that's not a thing I believe, and it doesn't match up with any of my other beliefs. But like at a gut level, it just feels wrong, and I don't do it if I can help it.
Yeah, no, that seems
it's reasonable, I guess. So the other order of business that I like to do with folks is I like to give you an opportunity to propose a better sign off before we do mine, because the one that I have is for no real reason. We thank one of my cats, Toni, to sign off. Do you have a better idea? Because I don't think it's good, but I haven't replaced it yet.
No, I mean, I don't know. I think giving thanks to a cat is totally fine. I do not have pets because I can't in my apartment.
Yeah.
And so whenever I'm around other people's pets, I am generally like just absurdly just like, hello, you are my best friend now. So I think paying homage to a cat is a completely solid way of doing it.
Okay. I don't think he's walked it on today while I've been on camera. Usually he does kind of wander through, and
I would have been losing my shit. I would have been like, oh, who's on your body?
Well, on that note, thank you, Toni.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Pizza.